Hello again from the Prim Reaper. I'm sorry that this is another non-misused word video. I have been and will continue to be quite busy for the last and next week, and as these videos are rather important to me, I don't want to half-ass them and put them out when I don't have the proper time to dedicate to decent research for them. At the same time, I also don't want to leave you guys hanging with no video for 2 weeks on end when I wind up getting wrapped up in something else. So I thought that I would do the next best thing and put out something that's been on my mind for a little while, which may make this one a little bit more disorganized because I'm basically just tacking out some thoughts. The last week in particular has given me a fair bit of material for this kind of discussion, I'm extremely sorry to say. Oh yeah, and in case it wasn't obvious by my less than jovial tone, this isn't exactly a happy topic. My well of optimism has been a little bit drained as of late. So what am I referring to? Basically, I started giving it some more thought when the Honey Badgers had Brittany Simon on a Fireside chat. Now, I don't want you guys to get the wrong idea. I think it's great that a feminist was willing to come on and chat with Brian. She's way ahead of the curve of so many other people. But the line that bothered me came up when she was talking about how she used to be a hardcore social justice type.
And I understand, trust me, when I was like full SJW, like I get it, like saying, fuck white cis men feels really good because it's rooted in like some sense of like I am powerful because fuck these people.
Now, people who were watching this video live might remember my caps lock explosion in response to this comment in the chat. In my wildest dreams, I can't imagine why it would feel fun to hate entire groups of people. But unfortunately, this kind of thing seems to be common from social justice circles. Oftentimes, the folks that like to demand that everyone hold the title of feminist because feminism is about equality, yo, all of a sudden couldn't care less the moment you start talking about equality for groups that they hold less charitable views of. Just a few days ago, someone on my news feed was talking about how they were astounded that someone they were speaking to became angry only because she was happy that more women than men were graduating from med school now. I mean, what's the problem? This is what equality means, right? It's actually kind of sad how oblivious the comment was, especially when she blamed his anger on his fragile, straight white male ego. It actually really bothers me how so many people are okay with this kind of talk. It's not only normal for a lot of people to insult and belittle men, for some it's fun and empowering. Some even go as far as to call man-hating honorable. I just don't get it, especially considering that these very same people will often go on to decry men's rights groups or groups that are sympathetic to men's issues as hateful and misogynistic. Now, I'm not going to pretend that there aren't some men out there who are legitimately hateful towards women, but very rarely are these people supported in men's groups, and they certainly aren't considered empowered or honorable. Misogyny is not a pastime cheerfully embraced by all in the same way that misandry is, assuming people are even allowing that it's a real word. Actually, something that I've been giving a lot of thought over the past week is how I've never really had a red pill moment in my life. As I've already talked about on this channel, I can recall my first experience directly encountering feminism, and I can recall several later incidents as well, but there was never really a time that I took any of that stuff seriously. In my mind, it's always been, there are legitimate troubles affecting both men and women. I want to help them both as much as I can. It's one of the reasons that I got into psychology. I wanted to be able to help people feel better. Egalitarianism just seemed like the most natural thing in the world to me. Basically, two things about feminism just always rubbed me the wrong way whenever I directly encountered it. One, the emphasis on women's oppression, when it didn't match my life experience, my lived experience perhaps, at all. And number two, the focus on the patriarchy, male suppression of women, male opposition to women, any of that sort of thing. None of it ever made any sense because many of the most supportive people in my life have been men. Nothing that feminism had to say seemed like a relevant description of real life whatsoever. It was all too negative and bitter and divisive. So there was never really a moment that turned everything all around for me. I knew that feminism was off somehow in the same way that I knew that 2 + 2 = 4. So I think it's for that reason that when I see how much of a stranglehold feminism has on the conversation about rights, or when I see how much pushback there still is against men's issues, that I still take it particularly hard. In the past few weeks, there's been several examples of this. There's the cringeworthy interviews that Cassie J had to suffer through with the Australian news. The honey badgers have had several meetups cancelled in Australia for various reasons. The cafe event in Calgary, although it didn't get cancelled, thank goodness, has now been moved to a different location because we couldn't scrape together 130 people out of a city of over 1 million to come listen to concerns about men's well-being. But it's not just the apathy on that front that bothers me, though it does, but also the fact that there were people actively against it. For example, I tried to ask several people at the crisis hotline I volunteer at if it would be something that they were interested in. I mean, in my mind, it seemed pretty obvious that an event featuring a person talking about the suicide crisis affecting men would be relevant information for volunteers on a crisis line. Well, certainly not in one person's mind, who replied to tell me that I was promoting an event being run by a misogynistic MRA group. I tried to explain that the group has done nothing against women whatsoever, and that they've actually accomplished some great things for men in Canada, but I'm sure you can guess how well that went over. I was told that we need to focus on rights from a feminist perspective, not an MRA one. I told them that I prefer to look at it from an egalitarian perspective, but I received no response. I want to reiterate that this was just one person and not the crisis hotline as a whole, but I was still sad to see someone saying it. I also tried promoting the event in several subreddits as well, and though I'm pleased to report that I received plenty of positive support for the event, I also received the same kind of backlash that I already talked about. One person basically said, if you want to promote an event talking about men's issues, that's fine, but don't you say you're seeking equality because that just pushes people away. Yeah, excuse me for thinking that equality includes everyone, not just women. Reactions like this are why I still reject the feminist label even when people describe it as simply being for equality. Because with so many of them, it's, you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. I'm sorry to just sit here and complain. I find that talking about these sorts of things helps me to feel better. I know I'm coming at all of this from a position of wanting to help people, but seeing so many negative reactions just makes me confused. I'm sure that the people who've been doing this for longer are used to people saying things like this, and that's actually a shame. Like the honey badgers, for example. I see the amount of crap these guys have to deal with, but I mean, I've met most of them in person, for the Calgary Comic Expo trial. They're all so lovely and welcoming. Sure, they cuss and get angry at some of the things we talk about on the shows, but is that not a reasonable reaction to some of this stuff? That doesn't mean that they're hateful. And yet how many times is that label thrown at them? I have to wonder if it's not just projection. Like the people who claim to be fighting for women's rights talking about how man-hating is honorable, maybe they just assume that people who fight for men's rights must be as hateful as they are. But they're not. Likewise with Cafe. We talked with one of the main leaders on one of the HBR Pussycat casts, and he was nothing but kind and respectful and very clear that their group was not against women's rights and would be all too happy to help women in need as well. Yet, because their main focus is on men, they're called hateful. Hate. Now there's a word that's being misused. Anyway, I'm gonna wrap it up here. Sorry this one was a little bit of a downer and kind of disorganized, but it was something that I needed to get off my chest. As I said, talking about it helps me to work through it. I know that it's fine to want to help men and women, despite some people's rabid insistence that we only focus on the latter. I know that supporting men's issues that don't get talked about enough in society is the right thing to do, regardless of those who falsely label it as hate. I'll try to get back to my usual quality for next week, but things are going to be getting busy for me for the next few days, so it might take a little longer to get out the next video. I appreciate your guys' support. It helps me to work through dumb shit like this. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.